talk about the difference between static and not static. We'll be using the Fox class, which we've been using recently. So the short answer is that variables that are not static, like age, alive, location, each Fox instance, each separate Fox object gets its own copy of each variable, which means that all the different Fox objects can have different ages, because each Fox has its own age variable. That's not static. Static means that it's not a variable that describes a single Fox. It's a variable that's a characteristic shared by all Foxes. So there's only a single breeding age variable that's shared between all of the Fox instances. So if you had 100 Fox objects, they each have a breeding age, but their breeding ages are all the same variable. Not just the same value, but the same variable. So if one Fox changes its breeding age, that breeding age changes for everybody because the objects don't have their own copies of these variables. Because these variables aren't supposed to describe individual Foxes, they're supposed to describe the Fox class as a whole. So let's look at an example of that. Here I created two new Foxes, Robert and Sasha. I am going to display Robert and Sasha's ages, and notice that I am using public variables here, which we've discussed is a bad idea. But for my example, I'm doing it. Then I'm going to add to Robert's age, and I want you to notice that Robert's age changes and Sasha's doesn't, as you might expect. So let's run it and see. Oops, or you had to have a missing return value in your get energy level. Okay, let's try this all over again. There we go. Okay, so Robert's 22 and goes to 32, but Sasha stays 3 years old the whole time. So that's as expected. And that's because age is not static. Robert's age is a different variable than Sasha's age. Okay, so now let's do this. Now let's look at max age. So same situation. I'm going to display Robert and Sasha's max age. Then I'm going to change Robert's max age, and we'll see what happens. And hopefully you will predict what happens already. So you see that Sasha and Robert's max age both go up to 60, even though it looks like I only changed Robert's. And the reason why is because a static variable is a single variable that is owned by all of the instances. So changing one changes it for everybody. Accessing static variables through individual instances is sort of an unusual way of doing it. It's a lot more common to use the name of the class itself. Capital F Fox is not a Fox object. It's not Robert, it's not Sasha. Capital F Fox refers to the class Fox. So if I was going to do this, there actually are no Fox objects in this code because I've never run the Fox constructor. But I'm still allowed to change the max age for the Fox class because these static variables aren't owned by individual instances, they're owned by the class as a whole. So you can still change their values even though you've never made any objects, you've never made any instances of that class. Notice though that wouldn't make any sense to do for age. Here it says non-static field age cannot be referenced from a static context. So a static context is a context where you don't have an actual instance that's running the code. So here, I don't actually have a Fox instance yet, because I've never run the constructor, but I'm trying to say, what's the age of this particular Fox? And there is no particular Fox.